I really like my Yaesu FT-70D radio, but the battery life on it isn't the best. So if I can open up this side port, you'll see a 4mm barrel connector, and that's where you charge this radio. It also has a drop-in cradle, but I'm not interested in spending the money on that. Here's the adapter that it uses. It's a 110 to DC adapter. Here you can see the polarization that's used on the barrel connector, and then here's the barrel connector itself. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to build my own adapter that runs off of a 12-volt power source, and we're going to use these connection leads. I got a 10-pack of them for about $8 off of Amazon, just to make sure that you get a 4mm one. When you open this up, you can see that there are two connection points, one that goes to the center connector and one that goes to the outer connector. When you hook up your wire, you want to make sure that your polarization is reflected the same way that it is on that adapter. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use this 20 gauge wire. It's stranded copper wire. And we're going to put some heat shrink on here because I think that adds some ruggedness to it. And it helps secure the connection. See if I can figure out how all this stuff is going to fit together. And when it's done, it's going to kind of look something like this. Now on the other end, we are going to put some Anderson power poles. We just love Anderson power poles here. And then I'm going to put this boot over the Anderson power pole connection for added stability and ruggedness. When working with power poles, you want to make sure that you have the appropriate power pole crimper. Also, I'm going to use some cheap wire cutters, and then I'm going to use my wire strippers from Vice Grip that I really like. Oh, don't forget your snips. Now let's go ahead and get started. Now what we're going to do here is prepare our wire to go into the 4mm connector. So I'm going to split these wires and then I'm going to strip them. I want to be careful that when I wire this up, I do not create a short by accident. So I'm going to leave a little bit of insulation on the center conductor. And that is going to be my positive, or my red. And here we go. We begin the process of stripping this wire, and then we're going to get everything all wired up. Notice how precision I am when doing this. All right, now that that's done, we're going to strip the black side, and we're going to, well, maybe we'll test and measure. And that looks about right. Now we're going to strip the black side, and we're going to strip this one a little bit further down because of where the solder point is on our 4mm jack. One of the things I like to do is sometimes twist that insulation a little bit before I pull it completely off. It allows me to keep the stranded copper tight and snug. I've got the connector wired up the way I want, and I taped it to the cutting board so it doesn't move around. And now what we're going to do is we're going to solder those wires to the connector. I fired up my Hakko 888D soldering iron. And here I've got a little bit of solder, and I believe it's got lead in it, but don't tell anybody. And then we're going to go ahead and solder those wires right up to the connection points on the adapter. Just going to put a little bit of tin on the end of this thing. Make it nice and easy. And here we go. Now that's not exactly precision technique, but it'll do. Now with everything soldered in place, what I want to do now is I want to use my snips to cut off any excess for two reasons. One is I don't want anything to short out, and then I don't want anything to obstruct the fitting of the case on the connector. I'm going to use my wire crimpers to go ahead and crimp the wire into the connector to make sure that everything's solid. And once that's done, we're going to use our multimeter to check for continuity, to ensure that we don't have any shorts, crossed wires, or mistakes. As I was doing the testing, I realized that the end of my probe wasn't going to fit into the barrel connector. So what I did is I stuck a little solder in there, and then I just used that as an extra conductor. and everything tested out. So far, so good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to apply the shield and the heatsink. So here you can see that I've got the wire ready. All the connections look fine, and I want to go ahead and slide this heat shrink tubing up to where it makes sense. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover the solder connections here. I don't want to go all the way up because I don't want to cause any problems. Not that it would. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to slide the housing up. I think that's called the housing. And then I'm going to carefully screw that on. And then I'm going to fire up my Harbor Freight heat gun, something like that. I got it for $9.99 on sale, and I just love it. And we're done. That doesn't look too bad if I do say so myself. Alright, the next part is going to be connecting the power poles. Okay, we're prepping the cable. What I've done is I've cut the end of the boot off and I slid that over the cable along with about 1.5 inches of heat shrink. Now I'm splitting the pair here, and I'm going to put on 2 smaller pieces of heat shrink because I like to apply additional heat shrink right behind the crimp once I put the power pole crimper on. I have to strip these wires, so I'm going to do that real quick. And then I'm going to do my trick where I twist these a little bit. And that helps get the copper strands nice and snug. And then I just pull the ends off. I'm going to go ahead and continue separating these wires a little bit. And then here's where I apply the heat shrink. So that way, once we crimp our ends on, we'll have everything we need to assemble the end of the cable. Okay, now we're going to crimp on our power pole connectors. And when I do this, I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to the orientation of the spoon on the connector. Okay, and now with the terminals crimped on, I'm going to heat up my heat shrink. And that again just helps make sure that I have a good mechanical connection and adds some stability. Once again, I break out the multimeter and I run through some quick continuity tests. And everything's looking pretty good, so we're happy. Now we're going to apply the power pole housing. And I want to make sure that I pay special attention to the orientation. When you apply power poles, you want the red on the left with the spoon on the bottom of the connector. And these kind of snap together somewhat easily. Well, not yet. Sometimes you got to finesse it a little bit. But we get the job done. There we go. Oh, not yet. Now we got it. Okay, now with everything put together, we're going to fire up the heat gun again. Now that that part's done, we want to slide the boot up and then make sure that that covers our power pole connectors completely. I guess I should say covers them correctly. There we go, and our cable is now complete. And here we are with the finished product. Now, this is something that I'm going to use. I'm not telling you that you should create a cable like this and you should use a cable like this. I'm just saying it's an option. If you make a cable and it messes up your radio, that's not on me, that's on you. So anyhow, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the side port. I'm going to plug my cable in, and then I'm going to connect the power poles to this Bio-NO battery. I believe it's a 4.5 amp hour battery. And there we go. And you can see that the radio is charging. At this point, I want to say thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or recommendations, go ahead and post them below.